And Albert Koehl is next.
Thank you. My name is Albert Koehl. I'm a member of the Toronto Cyclists Union, and an environmental lawyer here in Toronto. Wanted to start off with a quote, which is, "Active transportation, people-powered movement, ease the economic and environmental costs associated with traffic congestion. Relatively few residents in Toronto walk or cycle to work or school despite living rather close. Active models of travel will not flourish unless there is an environment for safe and efficient walking and cycling." Now my question to you, is that a quote from an environmental group or the Toronto Police Service? The answer is that's the Toronto Police Service. So people are getting it, that providing more cycling is an answer to many of our problems, both environmental and economic. I wanted to address my remarks to two things. First, provincial law as it relates to this issue, and secondly, global warming. My observation is, and someone alluded to this earlier, is that when the rubber hits the road in terms of city decision making, city planning, that rubber usually is covered with, covers 4 wheels and is carrying 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of metal and a single occupant. There are better solutions. Provincial law, for instance, the Planning Act requires that planning decisions made by cities be consistent with policies and plans. One of those policies and plans is the Provincial Policy Statement 2005, which says healthy communities should be promoted by planning public streets, spaces and facilities to be safe, meet the needs of pedestrians, and facilitate pedestrian and non-motorized movement, including but not limited to walking and cycling. The growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe says the transportation system within the Greater Golden Horseshoe will be planned and managed to be sustainable by encouraging the most financially and environmentally appropriate mode of trip making, and goes on to say that pedestrians and cycling networks should provide safe, comfortable travel for pedestrians and bicyclists within existing communities. Now examples of the contradictions we see in city planning, however, is that, for instance, we have a bike month, but we have less than 100 kilometers of bike lanes in the city. Of 5,600 kilometers of roads, less than 100 kilometers of bike lanes. We have bus shelters that the city is investing money in, which say, why don't you cycle more? Well, the Toronto Police will tell you people don't cycle more because it's dangerous on our streets. A couple of words about global warming. The news on global warming is all bad from the scientific community. In fact, it's distressing. We heard some years ago that by 2050, the Arctic ice cap would be melted in the summertime, be ice-free in the summertime in 2050. Now scientists are saying we'll be ice-free in 2013, in 5 years from now. And in fact, all of the worst predictions in terms of the range of possibilities that the UN told us about, the worst of those, the worst range is coming true. So what does that mean? It means drought, storms, and flooding will become more common, and that's a first step towards what the UN scientists are talking about: mass extinctions, mass starvation, mass migrations. What does that have to do with this project? Well, here's what it has to do with this project. Motor vehicles emit 25% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. That's the first point, but that doesn't include things like refining the tar sands. If you're against the tar sands, remember that some of the gasoline in your car might come from the tar sands because it's already being refined in Sarnia. Second point is that, for instance, our favorite delusion is that we're going to solve the climate crisis from behind the steering wheel of our car. Now, California has the most aggressive proposal in terms of greenhouse gas reductions from its car fleet. I spoke to someone, they're talking about 35 miles per gallon by 2020. I asked someone in that Air Resources branch when they expected to see a decrease in emissions from motor vehicles. And the fellow told me, the scientists, the emissions will stop increasing in 2020 and then stabilize. So in other words, a decade. But we're talking about some years that we have to solve these problems. So finally, a word about traffic. Number one, bikes are traffic without motors, without pollution, and the most efficient vehicle on our roads. Two, You can fit a lot more bikes on Jarvis than you can fit cars. In other words, if we're worried about getting vehicles onto Jarvis, let's make it more cars. And third, 1% of our traffic is bikes. In cities like Copenhagen, 30% of the traffic is bikes. So we've got a long way to go. Now, one more quote. I'm not going to ask you to guess who this is from. It's James Hansen, one of the world's leading climate scientists who sounded the alarm about climate change 20 years ago. He says that elements of a perfect storm, a global cataclysm, are assembled. We have used up all the slack in the schedule for actions needed to defuse the global time bomb. So finally, I'll end by saying, instead of the city being accused of paying lip service to the environment, and I know there are a lot of very dedicated environmentalists on City Council, we can be a model for all of those other places that are copying our car-centered model. We can be a model for them by providing better pedestrian realms and better cycling. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions of the deputant? Councillor Walker, you have the floor.
The proposal before us today, do you support it in its present form?
I support bike lanes. I understand Councillor Ray is putting forward a proposal with bike lanes on Jarvis. I think we need bike lanes on Jarvis as a first step to getting more bike lanes across the city.
As well as removing the middle lane?
Yeah, I think this, yes. It sounds to me like the space has to come from the paved road. And I think this debate between pedestrians and cyclists is a phony one. It really is between pedestrians and cyclists on the one hand, and the amount of space we dedicate to cars on the other.
So if I can, you support removing the middle lane plus a bicycle lane on either side?
If that's the option that allows for bike lanes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. I have our